It is race weekend once again. Alexis Nunes alongside Laurence, Edmondson. The Styrian Grand Prix is upon us. We got to see qualifying. I'm still buzzing from it, Laurence, because who needs caffeine when you've got qualifying in the rain? Now, this is something that we probably didn't even expect would happen, considering the amount of rain that we saw this morning in Austria, which pretty much makes Lewis Hamilton's lap to finish pole position for tomorrow just all the more special, doesn't it?
Well, we had a story written already that qualifying was cancelled and that we'd be coming in tomorrow morning nice and early for a qualifying session ahead of the race. But no, incredible. And this is exactly what we want to see from Formula One. Drivers on the edge in the most difficult conditions, doing what they do best. And Lewis, 1.2 seconds ahead of Max Verstappen, who was in second place. Okay, Max didn't get his final lap in, but that is still such a margin, such a margin. And for Lewis, who had a bad weekend, just 7 days ago at the original Austrian Grand Prix, had an awful Friday practice, and then came back with that lap. That was sensational.
Any of the problems that he had yesterday, because I know he did come out and he was talking about, that there was some issues with the car here or there, that it wasn't quite moving how he'd want it to. Are those just gone out the window now and it's just like back to normal tomorrow for Mercedes and Lewis?
Yeah, that's right. So the team looked in depth at everything that was wrong with the car. I believe it was something to do with the front suspension. They found that it wasn't acting as it should be, or it wasn't quite set up how it should be, and they've rectified that. But Lewis didn't get any time to figure out where the car was. He was straight into Q1. There was no final practice, because it was rained off. So he went straight into Q1, immediately had to be on the pace, and he was. But that's why he's a six-time world champion.
I was about to say, so just Lewis being Lewis, I suppose. And if Lewis is being Lewis, that's taken care of. But what about Max Verstappen now? He, of course, finished second, so still very good. But I know he will be hurting after last weekend, and especially in the fact that we've had the talks with Nate on our podcast about how this is Verstappen territory. So how is he looking, for tomorrow?
So Red Bull looks a lot better this weekend. They brought a rear wing update to their car, and it seems to work wonders. So if we roll back to yesterday when it was dry, it looked like Red Bull actually had the fastest car ahead of Mercedes. Okay, Lewis had that problem yesterday, and Valtteri, we didn't think quite pushed to the limits. But the early signs were that Red Bull had found a huge amount, whilst Mercedes had lost some performance. So if that holds true in the dry when we go racing tomorrow, that 1.2 second gap, I'm putting that down to Lewis being a wet weather god. But yeah, in the dry, I think Verstappen's going to be right up there again. And we hope we'll see a really exciting race. You've got basically the two best drivers in Formula One in two cars which are starting to find their sweet spot. And I think we could be on for a proper race tomorrow.
Well, of course, the others definitely impressed. But before we get to them, let's just round out the big three, shall we? And talk about Ferrari in this one, 10th and 11th, I believe it was. But, a marginally better weekend for Sebastian Vettel. I don't know if there's any comfort he can find in that, Laurence.
I'm not so sure. I mean, it's one place better on the grid, so that is something. And he made Q3 and he beat his teammate. But I think Ferrari will still be worried. And really, we thought the wet weather was going to be a blessing for Ferrari, because Ferrari's biggest issue at the moment is straight line speed performance, which tends to come from the engine. In the wet, you're not on full throttle as much as you are in the dry. Therefore, that usually is masked a bit. But instead, they were still miles off. So a real concern that this car has maybe some real fundamental handling issues that aren't going to be easily solved, especially as Ferrari already brought the start of an upgrade package. They brought it one race earlier to this race, and still the car doesn't look great. I think Seb might be a bit happier, but no, qualifying 10th for Ferrari. And we talk about them as the big three, but at the moment, they're not in that big three. There's Red Bull and Mercedes at the front, or Mercedes and Red Bull at the front, and then there's a midfield pack, and Ferrari are in that midfield pack. And the last two weekends have been proof of that.
And best of the rest, and our good friend Lando Norris, of course, did not have as good a weekend, but it's okay. It's still Lando. George Russell, though, seemed pretty happy with where he finished too.
Yeah, so there were some real standout performers in that session. I would say Carlos Sainz, third place in the McLaren. Lando got third place on the grid last weekend and in the race. But yeah, Carlos has hit back straight away and got that third place for McLaren in the wet. Very good lap indeed. Esteban Ocon, fifth in the Renault. We didn't really see much from Renault last weekend, but Esteban Ocon, throughout that wet session, he kept popping up near the top of the timing screens. Remember, this is a guy who's spent a year on the sidelines. He was a year out of Formula One after losing his drive at Racing Point. He's now come back at Renault and he is performing. And then, as you mentioned, George Russell, I think, there was some doubt maybe last year because the Williams was so far off the pace that, is George really on the same level as the rising stars like Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc? so far this year, he's going out of his way to prove that he is absolutely in that group of drivers. And his lap today was sensational. He was just a tenth of a second off Sebastian Vettel in Q2. So that meant he was just a tenth of a second off getting into the top 10 qualifying shootout in a Williams. So beating both Ferraris, getting through in a Williams. So, okay, he didn't quite do it this time, but I reckon in the future he could. And this is what it's all about. When you're in a car at the back of the grid, you've got to make the most of the unusual circumstances, the slight levelers like a wet Saturday. And that's exactly what Russell did. So he really was my star of qualifying. Okay, Lewis probably edged it just because of that margin at the front, but Russell's right up there with him.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content plus live streaming, make sure to subscribe to ESPN Player.